In the past several days, world-renowned Catholic figures have opined on the validity of Francis as Pope, specifically on his leadership and his adherence to the deposit of faith, to which Francis is sworn to uphold and protect, to preserve from one generation to the next. Two figures have spoken on this issue in written form, and they opine about what to do about the Francis papacy. Hint. They say there isn't much anyone can do about the state of the Church and the papacy today. But let's actually get into what these two figures said. The two figures in question are Chris Ferrara and Aldo Maria Villa, both who released scorching appraisals of Francis and the validity of his position. For those who question the papacy of Francis and if it is even real, I recommend after this video you read the articles, which are on my sources blog at returntotradition.org, and I recommend that you read them in full because at the end of the day, I can't make up your mind for you, nor would I be arrogant enough to try. So check them out for yourself. Now let's get to it. And there's a lot of quotes here today, and some of them are lengthy. First, we'll check in with the Italian journalist who has stated that Rome is without a pope. He is not making the sedevacantist argument. If you're not familiar with sedevacantism, it is the belief that there is no pope and there has not been one since 1958 or 1962, depending on who you ask. There are a lot of varieties of sedevacantism out there, as almost any sedevacantist will admit. Though there are other variants of this idea as well. I've actually encountered sedevacantists who believe there hasn't been a pope since the 12th century. A strange position. Anyway, at the most basic level, sedevacantism says that every pope that has come after either Pius XII in most cases or Paul VI has been a pretender, an anti-pope, and their argument is made on the fact that the popes taught from the council and everything they have taught onwards has been at odds with what the church has taught on numerous important theological subjects before the council, on many topics not limited to the liturgy. For traditionalists, the state of the church and our argument is not limited broadly to the Novus Ordo, but to the relationship between church and Caesar, the role of the church in the world, the partnership between the church and the secular elite, and a whole host of theological questions. I am not a sedevacantist, but I do think that sedevacantists should be treated with the same respect the individual sedevacantist treats other Catholics with. Now, the Italian journalist is named, again, Aldo Maria Valli, and he is a well-respected figure who has recently come out and said that Rome has no pope. If he is not taking the sedevacantist position, then what does he mean by this? I'll give you part of his article that is now spreading like wildfire online, and you'll be able to read the rest for yourself through the link at the sources blog at returntotradition.org, which is my website. From his piece, quote, Rome is without a pope. The thesis that I intend to support can be summarized in these 5 words. When I say Rome, I am not referring only to the city of which the Pope is the bishop. When I say Rome, I mean the world. I mean the present reality. The Pope, although physically present, in reality is not there because he does not do what the Pope does. He is there, but he does not perform his duty as successor of Peter and vicar of Christ. There is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. There is not Peter. Who is the Pope? The definitions, depending on whether one wants to highlight the historical, theological, and pastoral aspect, may be different. But essentially, the Pope is the successor of Peter. And what tasks were assigned by Jesus to the Apostle Peter? On the one hand, feed my sheep. On the other, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is what a Pope should do. But today there is no one who carries out this task. And you, once you have turned your back, strengthen your brothers in the faith. So says Jesus to Peter. But today, Peter does not shepherd his sheep and does not strengthen them in the faith. Why? Someone answers, because Bergoglio does not speak about God, only about travelers, ecology, the economy, and social questions. But this is not so. Actually, Bergoglio does speak about God, but what emerges from the whole of his preaching is a God who is not the God of the Bible, but an adulterated God, a God, I would say, who is weakened, or better still, adapted. Adapted to what? To man and his demand to be justified in living as if sin did not exist. Bergoglio certainly plays social themes at the center of his teaching, and with sporadic exceptions, appears prey to the same obsessions of the dominating culture of Caesar. But I believe that this is not the profound reason why Rome is without a pope. In wanting to highlight social themes, it is possible to have an authentically Christian and Catholic perspective. The question with Bergoglio is another one. It is that his theological perspective is deviated, and this is for a very specific reason, because the God of whom Bergoglio speaks is not one who forgives, but rather one who removes all blame. End quote. Valli then dives into Amoris Laetitia and gives example after example of responsibility for sins being committed being removed from the sinner. Amoris Laetitia, for those not familiar, was the papal encyclical that broke the will of many Francis defenders to keep trying to explain away every action he engaged in, because in that encyclical, Francis redefined the nuptial sacrament in such a way that it not only lost its permanency, but also opened the door in practice to the Church embracing exactly what our Lord said never to do. Let no man separate what God has joined together. That was the breaking point for many Catholics, and Valli explains that this was done to embrace the world, the rule of all the would-be Caesars, who want a secularized faith. Amoris Laetitia is not to be understood separate from all of Francis's work on the environment, human fraternity, or all the rest of it. The same logic that brought the world Amoris Laetitia is behind Francis's trip to the ancient temple that featured demonic activity that I reported on Friday, and that almost every one of us reported on last week. The same logic that said that we are all brothers, that says that everyone except traditionalists are welcome, and the same logic that demands that synods be held in Dallas, Germany, Italy, and everywhere and elsewhere to relativize the message of the Church to the local people. Like I said, that article is linked in the sources blog at returntotradition.org. This piece caught fire and drew the attention of Catholics around the world, to the point that the author caught a lot of flack for it and had to walk back his statement a bit. In a piece titled Peter's Errors, however serious, do not give us the power to revoke the Petrine Mandate, he says that Francis still possesses the mandate of Peter. Here is a short excerpt from his latest statement so you can see what he is doing here. Quote, reflecting on the figure of the Apostle Peter and on the primacy that Christ conferred on him in the first person, I was particularly struck by the fact that Jesus never revoked it from him during the time of his stay on earth, not even after accusing him of letting himself be taken by the logic of the devil with the words that express the thought of men contrary to that of God. And Jesus even called him Satan. He could have kicked it out and replaced it with another, and as we would almost certainly have found it necessary to do. At the same time, Jesus personally committed himself to guaranteeing that the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church. Therefore, he reserved for himself the right and the power to intervene, if and when it was needed, to keep it faithful to himself, at least in the rest of it, to Satan who disguises himself as an angel, or to wolves who disguise themselves as sheep, and to the shepherds who have lost their way. Not even the priests wondered, where is the Lord? The holders of the law did not know me. The shepherds rebelled against me, he says. However, Sirius do not give us the power to revoke the Petrine Mandate, and only Christ has the power to intervene, and he knows how to do it. The temptation to detach oneself from the Church in the name of these errors, triggered by doctrinal errors, and to justify who, in the name of these errors, triggers a schism, cannot be followed without objective damage on the part of those who yield to it, damage that affects him and those who follow him. The distinction between a legal schism and an ontological schism runs the risk of being very specious, to justify a separation that would end up not recognizing one's own bishop and or the Pope, up to not mentioning them in the celebration of Mass, thus opening remotely the possibility of the most serious step still to arrive at the request for the illicit ordination of new bishops, or even just to justify it when it occurred in the past. It is then difficult to go back, as history has taught. We need an objective bond with the Church of Christ, guaranteed by the rules that he himself established. We cannot assume that we are superior to those rules and be confident that we will remain in that bond. Sometimes one feels a temptation to give in to this presumption, looking for loopholes to justify oneself, even among the best. It is up to God alone to resolve the situation, and it is God who must be prayed for, although accepting this logic can cost a lot, as it must have cost Abraham. But as we know, Abraham replied, God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering. End quote. Now, I don't actually necessarily agree with everything he said there, but the general spirit of it is true. And in other words, no man can judge the Pope. That is a law of the Church, and it's a timeless law. It goes back to the Apostles, and it is why I have never one time called Francis a heretic. People forget that the law of the Church leaves such questions to God, though many of the saints have debated from various positions what to do if a Pope were to preach heresy. Some have said the hierarchy could remove him, others have said that no authority on earth can do so. It is all above my pay grade, but the author's point is that despite everything Francis has done, he is the Pope. I'm sure many of you will find that debatable, and I understand why you feel that way. Feel free to debate that in the comments, please. Just do it with respect. That's all I really ask. Now on to Chris Ferrara, who makes a different kind of point. Ferrara is known to many traditionalists as a voice who frequently speaks at the Fatima Center conferences and talks about the need to do the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary as per the Fatima message, and has pointed out numerous times that this has not been accomplished as asked at Fatima, and that we have not lived in an age of peace, despite what some are now claiming. Ferrara is also a lawyer who defended the rights of the Church and the faithful to worship without interference from Caesar in California, and is one of the only reasons you can attend Mass in California at all. His victories for the Church there should not be overlooked, but sadly have been by some. Anyway, writing for The Remnant, Ferrara begins by expounding on all the weird things that went on in America in the selection of its new head. He then compares them to how we got Francis, and boy, does it sound similar to what happened recently. Quote, turning to Bergoglio's selection, he too arrived on the papal see under a cloud of suspicion about illicit maneuvering, both before and during the conclave, to obtain the necessary support from the College of Cardinals. We are all familiar with the substantial evidence that Team Bergoglio, including members of the St. Gallen group, lobbied for his selection before the conclave and worked to secure the necessary support with his prior consent, in an organized effort even as the Washington Post has reported apropos Austin Ivere's famous expose, The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. Ivere hastily backed away from his claim regarding Bergoglio's prior consent to be selected, but we have copies, it is right there in my copy, of his book where he recounts that after the failed attempt to have Bergoglio selected at the 2005 conclave, the organizers had learned their lesson and in 2013 better prepared the way. Ferrara here now quotes Austin Ivere, and I recommend you get that first edition of that book if you can find it. Quoting Ivere here, spotting their moment, the initiative was now seized by the European reformists who in 2005 had pushed for Bergoglio. Some of them, like Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, were too old to participate in the conclave. Others, including Walter Casper, who was just under 80 when the papal see fell vacant, Godfried de Niels, and Karl Lehmann were participants. They had learned their lessons in 2005. They secured Bergoglio's assent. Asked if he was willing, he said that he believed that at this time of upheaval for the Church, no cardinal could refuse de Vast. Murphy O'Connor knowingly warned him to be careful, that it was his turn now, and was told, Capisco, I understand. Then they got to work, touring the cardinals' dinners to promote their man, arguing that his age, 76, should no longer be considered an obstacle, given that popes could retire. Having understood from 2005 the dynamics of a conclave, they knew their support traveled to those who made a strong showing out of the gate. Their objective was to secure massive support for Bergoglio on the first ballot. Here, Ferrara then continues with his own thoughts. Bergoglio's alleged prior consent to accept the nod for the papacy aside, Ivere's description of his illicit movement for his assent has never been retracted by Ivere, or negated by any of the cardinals he names, including Murphy O'Connor of Westminster, de Niels of Belgium, Casper and Lehmann of Germany, Schonborn of Vienna, Vinc Troy of Paris, and Santos Abril y Castello of St. Mary Major. Under John Paul II's Apostolic Constitution, Universi Dominici Gregis, this sort of behavior surrounding a conclave is supposed to be punishable by the, quote, penalty of excommunication latia sentia, reserved to the Apostolic See, end quote. But what of it? How do we know which of the organizers actually incurred that penalty without knowing what they did exactly? And even if some of them did incur excommunication, Bergoglio is still the Pope, and as is with the case with Caesar, there is nothing we can do about it. Worse, there is nothing we can do about it for as long as Bergoglio lives, which could easily be another 10 years. It being impossible that the man will ever relinquish his power by resigning as he has teasingly suggested, the better to display his humility with no sign of any real intention of doing so. End lengthy Ferrara quote. There is more, but I recommend you read that from The Remnant. It's a fantastic piece, and is linked in my show notes on my site as well. Especially, I recommend it if you're really interested in those the parallels between Francis and, well, the other guy. All my sources are linked there for a variety of reasons to comply with the terms of service of this place. Ferrara then goes on to compare the secular ruler, who says he is a Catholic, to Francis and shows how they are analogous figures, how very similar they are. But here's his takeaway, and it's critical. Quote, Bergoglio is Pope, but he is not my Pope in the sense that he does not want to be Pope. defender of the faith, morals, and sacred tradition, against the movements of a hostile world. Rather, Bergoglio as a leader of the Church's merger with the same hostile world underway since the Second Vatican Council, which he defends with all the vigor of Pius X precisely because it did not defend faith, morals, and sacred tradition against the world's movements. Rather, as Paul VI so fatuously put it, instead of depressing analyses, encourage remedies instead of direful prognostics, messages of trust issued from the Council to the present-day world. The modern world's values were not only respected but honored, its efforts approved, its aspirations purified and blessed. And in response, the modern world spat in Paul's face, leaving him to lament only 8 years later that the opening of the world at the Council became a veritable invasion of the Church by worldly thinking. End quote. On that score, Paul VI is correct. The Church is inundated with worldly thinking. Francis is the living, breathing embodiment of that spirit, the spirit of the world, the spirit of Vatican II, and there isn't much anyone can do about it. Catholics often ask what we can do about Francis, and the answers are few. Pray for the coming of a holy pope. Pray for the conversion of the current one, and withdraw your material support from his works. Support the Church in other ways. You are required as a Catholic to support your parish, but there are other ways to do it. And most importantly, learn what the Church has always taught on a wide variety of topics so you will not get pulled into the novelties Francis promotes. That is precisely why I put up old pre-Vatican II papal encyclicals, lives of the saints, teachings of holy cardinals and bishops, and lay figures on the weekends, so that the faithful can learn what the Church has always taught on a variety of issues before the worldly spirit entered the Church. Given that it is Lent, I hope you take advantage of those resources and learn what the Church teaches, for it is the only real way to reject modernism, to learn the faith. So what did you think of all this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know a lot of people will want something more concrete to do, but again, the law of the Church is that there really isn't much that can be done. Some people talk of an imperfect council, but I don't think that's ever actually been done. So it would be uncharted territory for anyone to try, and also remember that Francis chose 57% of the people who will participate in the next conclave, and those are the same people who would be the participants in an imperfect council. So the outcome of that is already predictable. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments, please. And as always, I thank you for your support of this channel, and please pray for the Church. Thank you for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.